vision is titled Risk Communication in the yellow font, but then basically I'm talking about the risk of underestimating the power of communication in the area of food safety. And then I'm asking my colleague Shan, who will be moving my presentation forward so that I can see the chat screen. And then this is an interactive situation using the Zoom. So if you have any questions in the middle of the presentation, please start typing up so that I can see, and then I may be able to address during the presentation. So please feel free to type your questions. So next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, that I would like to just draw your attention to those headlines that the food safety issues are making in the last few decades. And then you sometimes wonder that is it about the proper food safety information exchange through the mainstream media, or are they just trying to make a big headline so that people buy their media? So this is rather scandalously written, or is it like a properly communicated? This is always a very questionable issue depending on the media type. Next, please. And then also this is one type of the social media used information provision. You see that this is saying the truth about cancer presence. So basically this is an organization called The Truth About Cancer, right? And then they are saying top 10 cancer causing food to avoid. And then don't you think like this infographics are very well made with lots of nice graphics, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 2, you know, like a number 10, and then they are very nicely laid out, but then please look closely what they are saying. So top 10 cancer causing foods to avoid. Number 1 is GMO. Number 2 is microwave popcorn. Number 3 is canned products. Number 4 is grilled red meat. Okay, you see that you are very, very smart in this room, and then everybody knows about food safety. We can instantly tell that this is not true. And then we can really say that what evidence is supporting, you know, those kind of information. But as much as we want to object those kind of information, the truth is that it's there, it's out there, and then lots of people retweet and reshare, and then some people really get scared of those products, and then they seem real to them. And then how do we deal with it? Why those social media information are so influential to the people? And next slide. And then you probably have seen this kind of video. This went viral. Some people start talking about the rice never fully cooked, and then they found out this was plastic, and then took the video and then shared with everybody, and then people get scared there's a fake rice, plastic rice, but then it's all fake. And then, you know, I mean, it actually much costly to create a plastic rice rather than a regular rice. And then people wondering why people, first of all, do this kind of fake news. And then second of all, why people believe this kind of thing. And then why people try to spread this kind of fake news to everybody. So these are the things that we really have to think. One, maybe that the motivation to create this kind of thing is to have a one-time fame, that you want to have a very much of the fame to say something scandalous. And then people who share is very interesting because people want to protect their loved one, and then they find that it is very interesting, and then it's important to share this kind of information. Therefore, they sometimes share this kind of information, and then somehow this kind of fake news goes viral, and then people start really believing that this is something that is happening. But then I want to ask you one question, that how do we deal with it from the food safety experts or food safety professionals' point of view? So next slide. So scandals formulate basically consumer concerns. So something is not quite right, and then people start getting the information from various media. It could be a mainstream media, it could be a social media, it could be rumor, and then we start talking about it. And then as the consequence can be very rare or severe, then people becomes more concerned and then more scared. And then also the fears are formulated because maybe sometimes because of the ignorance of the scientific issues or terminologies. And then sometimes I notice that some people have very big barrier against these terminologies of some chemical structures. And then I will demonstrate that later. And then the reality, when you look into it, the real consequences to the human health of those kind of information that are scandalously reported can vary. It can have absolutely no impact, or it can have a severe adverse impact. And then sometimes that we have experienced before that there's some fake products that can have no harm to the human body, but then it's just not something that they are selling what it is. So adulterated food does not necessarily mean unsafe food directly. It's just different food. It is a food fraud. So we really have to deal with this kind of issue, separating the issue from food safety issues sometimes. And then also I spoke about the roles of media, and then this is huge. And then as you can imagine that this digital world, and then young people easily sharing the information, video, photos, everything that can be totally forged, and then but then still you can share with people, and then it can look like true. Then this is the era that we are living, and then we really have to make sure that how to deal with media. And then also this, there are significant chunk of people who are economically motivated to make a counterfeit products or adulterated products. So it is very important to really look into the trust issues, because then we really can find the root cause of this kind of communication. Okay, next please. Now I will show some true information and false information to you. So this is one time, I think it was about 7-8 years ago, that it was circulated among various different media that some places are using, those street food is using the oil from sewage, because you know, if you go to the sewage and then there is the oil in the surface, and then they scoop the oil and then make it for frying some food using that oil, and then it is very, very yucky. And then if you really think about it, it's like impossible to accept this situation. But then you see, this is actually truth that some people did it in certain part of the world. But then this oil is heated up to many, I mean, a higher degree, 120, 160 degrees Celsius. So basically that when you really think about food safety issue, that it may not be a food safety issue, as much as I hate this situation, that it may not going into the food safety issues, but then it is also a trust issue, and then it is about the consumer protection. So this is one example. And next please. And this is basically true that you know BSC, right? And then this is the mad cow disease. And then this communication piece was created by United States CDC. And then they created this brochure because this did have a real food safety consequences, and then they really had to raise the awareness of this very bizarre disease, and then they really needed to tell the consumers that how it can get spread and what is the consequences and what to do about this. So this, it looks like a very scandalously written, although this is the government oriented brochure, but then this is really telling people the truth, and then this is actually perceived as a correct, accurate set of information communicated in the proper way. And then next one, please. And I don't know if you have ever seen this website. This is called dhmo.org, and DHMO stands for dihydrogen monoxide. And then this website is experimental design. And then I wish I can see the audience now that I cannot see anyone, but then I wonder that if any of you know about this DHMO, that have you ever heard of these chemicals? No, I'm seeing that shaking heads. And then I show you something. So next slide, please. So this slide is telling you what this DHMO is all about. So first of all, that the DHMO organization says the dangers, use, and potential threat posed by this chemical, DHMO, are widespread, and some feel terrifying. Here is just a small taste of DHMO. Some call DHMO the invisible killer. DHMO was found at every recent incident of gun violence. DHMO is used to enhance performance for athletes. DHMO has been found in our rivers, lakes, oceans, and streams. DHMO is a major component of acid rain, and thousands die each year after inhaling the DHMO. And then you know what? These statements are actually true. And I confirm they are true. And then people get scared, and then people start thinking like, okay, this is dangerous because all those statements sounds really a risk. And then we probably have to start thinking about how to assess the risk of this, and then how to block this kind of chemical to get into our food chain. And then we have to ban this chemical. You know, these are the thinking process that the people start having. But then by now that I think some of you are smiling, so I think that you know what I am talking about. You know DHMO is? I think you do. No? I think one, two are smiling. So click one time, Shan, so that we can show the DHMO. So it's actually H2O, and then people sometimes don't get it because it sounds like a name of the chemical, and then chemical. Okay. And then the chemical name scares people basically. And then people think that, okay, we read all kind of important information with this chemical name, and then this must be something really, really scary. And then this is the way that you can write just this simple H2O into something very dangerous sounding component. So this is how important it is to think about how important communication is. So that's what I said that about this demonstrating this scientific terminology barriers and how it works in the general public. Okay, the next slide, please. And then the real global killer is not water, but then I would say it's diarrhea. So you see this pie chart. I have put the one slice up in the blue color. It's 11%. This is the number of deaths in the world. It's a little bit outdated number, but then we have a little bit more now. 2012 data, it's saying that the world, 11% of the world population that has been reported with the cause of death is killed by diarrhea. And then more details on the right. Diarrhea kills 2,000 children every day. And then it's very scary because I'm not talking about every year, I'm talking about every day. And then it is the second leading cause of death among children 5 years or less. And then 88%, it's almost a majority of these diarrhea cases associated with unsafe water, bad hygiene, inadequate sanitation, basically food safety issues. And then most diarrhea germs are spread through food and water. So again, that it is born there and then spread through food and water. So rather we talk about DHMO, we should talk about diarrhea being the very, very bad killer in the world. Next, please. Now that today, from my keynote speech today, now that I have about 20 some audience, and then among them I understand about 10 students are listening to my presentation, and then I am really hoping that those students to take home those 3 key words and definitions. So this is my eventual goal. Please remember those 3 words starting from HRC. So H is hazard, risk is R is risk, and then C is communication. So I will give you the definition from the United Nations, and I really hope that you remember those 3 definitions today. So then it will be successful presentation from my side. And next, please. But then before I go into those 3 words, that I would really like to briefly explain what Codex Alimentarius is. I'm not sure if everybody knows it. If everybody knows it, I apologize. I may be redoing this explanation over and over, but then just because that FAO is one of the parent organization for the Codex Alimentarius, I feel that I need to explain a little bit more. It is an intergovernmental food standard setting body established by FAO and WHO in 1960s. And then this has, right now that we have 189 member states, sorry that this is outdated, but then we have more than 250 observers to set the food standards. Next, please. And Codex has 2 major objectives. One is protecting the consumer health, and then another one is facilitating the fair practice in food trade. But then the important thing is that Codex standards are not mandatory standards. It is set as a consensus of 189 member states, and then we do take it seriously, but then it is still non-mandatory in nature. It's a voluntary standards. However, there is a WHO coming in. So WHO had set the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement saying that WTO is going to use the Codex standards as a benchmark when there is a dispute in the trade in food in terms of the sanitary and phytosanitary issues. Therefore, countries automatically have to really look into the Codex standards if they don't want to have this dispute and then to lose this fight in WTO. So basically that it is non-mandatory, but then somehow very important in food trade. Okay, and next slide, please. So now we know the Codex. I am telling you the Codex definition of food hazard. So H, so first definition. So hazard is defined as a biological, chemical, or physical agent in or condition of food with the potential to cause an adverse health effect. So this is the definition. It's a bit complicated, but then you can really see the first part. It is a biological, chemical, or physical agent. So we are really talking about agent. So this agent is not yet creating any harm yet. Do you understand? So this is the agent that is existing right there. That is the hazard, okay? And next slide, please. So now I'm moving to risk. So this is a Codex definition of food safety risk. So food safety risk is a function of the probability of an adverse health effect and severity of that effect consequential to a hazard in food. So you see that again, the first part is most important. food safety risk is a function of the probability. So we are not talking about a thing, we are talking about the likelihood. So risk and hazard is actually a very different thing. The hazard is a thing, and then risk is chance, basically, the likelihood that create a bad thing. Okay, and next one, please. So when we talk about risk analysis, I hope that by now everybody is familiar with the risk analysis and its three components, that the risk assessment, risk management, risk communication. This is a risk analysis. It is not a hazard analysis. Risk analysis is to evaluate the risk. And then in order to evaluate the risk, you can see this purple chart that we can have this hazard identification and then hazard characterization. But then after we finish the identification and characterization of the hazard, we start talking about the risk. So we will start talking about what is the likelihood of this hazard potentially making a significant damage to the human health. So this is the big difference. So just to remember, it is not the hazard analysis. This is the risk analysis. So next slide, please. Now the last definition I would really like you to take home today. What is communication, right? I mean, it sounds like a very easy question to answer. What is communication? But then you ask yourself, it's very difficult to answer. What is communication for you? And then this is not a Codex definition because I will be introducing Codex definition later, but then in general, communication is defined as a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behaviors. I find this very, very interesting because common system of symbols are very prominent one is language. So I am originally from Japan, so English is my second language, and then I see that there are lots of different kind of people here, and then I am sure that some people speak English as a mother tongue, but some people don't. But then isn't it amazing that we are using this common system of symbols to exchange the information, and then that is called communication. So basically what we are trying to do in terms of food safety communication is already challenging because we really have to start finding the common system of the symbols or signs or behavior first, then start exchanging. So hopefully that is giving you some ideas that how challenging it is, but there is a way, step-by-step way to do it. Next slide, please. So this is the Codex definition of the risk communication. I am showing the booklet. Believe it or not, we do have a working principle for risk analysis for food safety developed by Codex Alimentarius. And then the Codex did define what risk communication, food safety risk communication is. And then it did surprisingly long paragraph to define food safety risk communication. So I broke down into three pieces. So first one, the food safety risk communication is an interactive through risk analysis process among risk assessors, risk managers, and all stakeholders to practice. So it has to be interactive. It is within this big circle of the risk analysis process. We have different stakeholders. We have risk assessors, risk managers exchanging the information. So this is food safety risk communication. Second part, the communication concerning risk and risk-related factors and risk perception. So three items, not only about risk, but then risk-related factors too. And then most importantly, risk perception is also an important factor in risk communication. And then the last piece I broken down is that risk communication, food safety risk communication for Codex also includes explanation of risk assessment findings and the basis of risk management decisions. So this is the important pieces that defines food safety risk communication defined by Codex Alimentarius. Next slide, please. Now that because I am now based in Bangkok, Thailand, I don't know how many of you have visited Bangkok before, I don't know, but then you may have seen our very famous, notorious traffic jam, which is really crazy. And then I will try this one to make hazard communication and risk communication. Right? So hazard communication, Shan, if you could do a 2-click. Then this is the hazard communication. Hazard communication is very simple because you are talking about existing thing. So I would go like Bangkok has a huge traffic jam problem. That's it, you know. And then this may be a nice information, but then people cannot act upon it because knowing that is an interesting thing, but then you don't know how to deal with it, how to manage it, how to control it, how to avoid it. You cannot really do it. So Shan, you can try the 2 more click. Then this, I know that it is too long, but then according to the Codex definition, this is the closest one that I can come up with. So I will read aloud. According to the latest statistics, because you really have to be based on evidence, the ABC road between A and C is extremely congested between 7 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. on weekdays. If you plan to take a taxi to go to your meeting in B between A and C on a weekday morning, it is better to avoid going through the ABC road or to leave home before 7 a.m. to minimize the risk to arrive late at the meeting venue. So you see that this is based on the evidence, you are specific enough, you are talking about the risk being late, right? That is the risk being late. And then you are talking about some sort of solution mitigation option, how to avoid this risk to be heavier. So this is the risk communication example. But then, okay, traffic is too far from the food safety, so I have prepared another one that is about food. So next slide. So salmonella in chicken. So I will give you a few minutes, I mean maybe just 1 minute that to think about what would be the hazard communication and then what would be the risk communication on this one. What would be the hazard in this situation? And then what would be the risk? You can use the chat if you have any ideas. You can just quietly think about it, no problem. Okay, you're thinking, very good. So Shan, can you do a 2-click so that we can see the first one? Okay, the hazard communication, it's something like this. Chicken may be contaminated with salmonella. That's a hazard communication. But do you see the danger of this kind of communication? Do you see it? You know, because we just say it, chicken may be contaminated with salmonella. This is very casual saying, but then they may not be contaminated either. And then why you are communicating with this while there is a chance that it's not contaminated? I mean, you are just scaring people off and then with unnecessary information. So hazard communication in food safety is to be avoided basically because this will not create anything positive. So risk communication, I am not saying this is the best, but then this is the most detailed version that I came up with. So Shan, 2 more click, yeah. A number of studies have confirmed that if the street vendor does not have a frequent access to hand washing facilities, and if he or she is not careful enough in avoiding cross-contamination, it is possible to have a significant level of salmonella in your chicken purchased at the street vendors in Bangkok, and the consequence can be serious. However, if you ask the vendor to re-grill your chicken in front of you right before you eat, the grilling temperature is usually high enough to kill most of the bacteria, and the probability to get salmonellosis from that chicken will significantly go down. So this kind of communication is the risk communication basically, but then this is not about the risk communication between risk assessors and risk managers. This is the communication from somebody to somebody individually at the consumer level. That this is something that I give usually as an advice. Somebody says like, is it safe to eat at the street vendor in Bangkok? And then I don't want to say it's very dangerous, because sometimes it's not and sometimes it is. So I try to give the wisest and then smartest answer to those people who ask me the questions, and then this is very similar to this one. And then I find that the hazard communication is the really misleading one. So I think that this is somehow you can think about what is it that the risk communication is very different from the regular communication. Next slide, please. So now that they're thinking about all kind of food safety risk communication, FAO and WHO jointly came up with this booklet. It's handbook, the risk communication applied to food safety. You can download on your tablet. You can just Google the title. You can have it in full, and then it has all kind of case studies, all kind of lessons learned, mistakes and success, and then everything in it. And then there are some principles that I am going to introduce. Next, please. So the FAO WHO guiding principles on the risk communication is basically those 7. The know the audience, involve the scientific experts, establish expertise in communication, be a credible source of information, share responsibility, differentiate between science and value judgment, assure transparency, and put the risk in perspectives. So basically, the know the audience is very easy one, that you really need to know that whom you're talking to. Involve the scientific expert is also easy, because you have to have a scientific knowledge and data to communicate with somebody. But then third one is tough one. I am a microbiologist by training, and then my youth was in the biohazard lab looking into the E. coli in the bite, and then I never really thought that I need to study communication. I have to improve my communication skills, but then guess what? In this job, communication is the most important skill. And then I tell you that you will realize this in the later stage of your life. So establish this one, you study, and then it is kind of fun to study about communications. I think that you start early, the better, and then start practicing, and then I think that practice makes perfect. And then this is something that I thought that I would stress to the ESL students. And then be a credible source of information. That is also like trust issues, that you cannot suddenly ask people to trust you one day. You have to earn the trust, right? So little by little, you give the solid data, solid information, solid communication, then your credibility goes up. And then I usually give this kind of advice to the government authority, because once they lose their trust, it's very, very difficult for the government to rebuild the trust. But then you accumulate trust, and the food safety control in the national level becomes so much easier. I can see it. The people generally trust the government, and then it's such a great way to communicate with the consumers. So this is something that you may want to remember at the individual level. And then the rest I will explain in the next slides. So audience, I already covered that we have various different audience, and you do have to tailor it depending on the audience. Next one, please. And then you do have to each time analyze your target audience every single time. And then you have to make the story to be very familiar to the audience. Next, please. And then always think about what is it that the other side will do after the communication? Because if you don't think about the actions to be taken, that all the talk, for example, in this presentation, I'm talking about lots of things. And then if I am not thinking about the students, what they are going to do with this information, that all the information is just nice to know, and then it will be lost. So that's why that I am trying to focus on, okay, these are the things you might want to take home. These are the things you might want to think about to improve, like these are the things that you really need to take actions upon. So this is important to think about. And next one, please. And then this is sometimes very difficult for me too, that am I trying to educate people or am I trying to persuade something to people? This is two totally different way of communication. So if I mix them up, I will fail. So I really have to decide, okay, today that this is for education. Or today that I am going to tell them that how important hand washing is, then I go for that kind of communication. Next slide, please. And people change their behavior when they are convinced, I wanted to put only, because knowledge does not connect directly to the behaviors, you know that, right? I mean, because nowadays this pandemic that the people start washing hands, and this is amazing change that I am observing, but then because they are so convinced, and then they do, but then how many decades, how many centuries that the people have not been washing their hands, and then food safety people telling, wash your hands forever, and then one day, this pandemic changed everything. So you see that the knowledge, people know that hand washing is important, but then they don't do it until they get convinced. So next one, please. And understanding the risk perception. And then unfortunately, the risk perception is the reality. And then how they perceive the risk is the reality. And then somebody like me who is working on the food safety areas and then talking to the government, how to deal with the stakeholders, we have to deal with the perception rather than the fact. So it is very, very important in the communication on food safety that the first understand how people think about the risk. Next, please. And are you familiar with this meme? This is the hand washing meme that if you closely look into it, it doesn't say anything about hand washing, but then it is singing about Queen's song, right? Do you see that? So this is a great example that the food safety message often rely on cognition. So we, as much as text that we want to put, talk, it doesn't matter actually. And then these visuals are the ones that most convey the message. Next one, please. And culture in society, it is such an important thing that people, I mean, for example, that I am Japanese, and then I know that eating raw fish can be risky, but then if somebody from outside of Japan come to me and then tell me that, oh, eating raw fish is dangerous, so you should stop eating, and then I will say like, okay, go away. So this is the important issue that, no, that's not going to happen. This is my culture, my people, my way of eating, and then that's not how you communicate about food safety. First, okay, how it is perceived, how it is treasured in the culture. This is very, very important when you start talking about food safety. Next one, please. And sorry that it is very hard to see, but then do we have British people here? We don't? I think this is coming from the British data. And then we were saying, sorry that it's very hard to see the influencers, but then we were asking that whose advice would you listen to, and then you know what they said. I mean, it's not there, but then outside of this statistics that the British people said that they listen to their hairdressers. So hairdressers' advice is the biggest one that they will seriously listen to. So it's very interesting. So if you really want to convey certain important message, you might want to talk to hairdressers. So anyway, but then this is important to know that the influencers, that is this slide is all about. Next one, please. And then you obviously have to choose a good channels and methods. And next, please. And social media, that the people sometimes like me, like a dinosaur, that we think that, oh, social media I don't use, but then you know that you're young, so you understand that this is not the era to say that you don't have an account on Twitter, right? So basically that if you are educators, if you are to communicate with somebody about food safety, you do have to use social media, and then you don't have to tell your life, but then you can learn how to use it, and then you utilize it, and you'll be very surprised how many people will read what you write and how many people care what you write. So this is very important, but then of course that the next slide will show you that there is some limitations. Yeah, so this only reaches certain people who are online. There are lots of people who are not online, and then this social media is not an emergency channel to communicate, and then the impact of the message shared through the social media may be very influential, but they may not sustain well, because people just get the information one way and then waste it, and the next one and then go. So this is a good one to have an outreach, but then to have sustained, then you may want to have a more concrete way to communicate with people. Next one, please. And this is, I think, that 2 more slides, but then need to know and want to know kind of balance, that people want to know a lot. So I want to know this, I want to know that, I want to know that. And then for the educators or for the government officials or for those providers, it is important to know that what people want to know so that they can address that, but then also that they can think about what those people need to know too. And then you really have to balance them. You cannot go for only one, oh, you don't have to know this, but you need to do this. Then people don't listen. So basically that they always, every single time, that you really need to think about what is the balance, good balance of giving them what they need and then giving them what they want. Next one, please. So this is the last one, the risk communication strategy that the FAO and WHO usually use. And then this is the matrix that when the risk is low and perceived risk perception is low, then we use a passive communication. Basically that if there is some sort of question, we answer. If there is a low risk, but then perceived risk is high, then we do responsive and then very sincere communication. We don't ignore, we don't say like, oh no, that is not correct or anything, but then we do quickly, timely respond and then give a very sincere, educative response. And if the risk is high, but then perceived risk is low, then we do educative, very regular, constant, emphasizing communication. And then if the risk is high and then perceived risk is also high, then we will do a proactive, highlighting good communication from our side. So I think that's all from me, right, Shan? Do we have more? No. Okay, so thank you very much and happy to take any questions. Thank you. Back to you, Jan.